Hello and welcome to Money Matters. My name is Busi Mbokazi and today we're discussing budgeting, counting the real cost of our money. Today, discussing this topic with us is Mqhele. Mqhele, welcome to Money Matters.
Thank you for having me.
Mqhele, what is a budget? We've heard this word so many times. We know it from our governments. We know it within our households. What is a budget?
Yes, okay. A budget is an expression of a plan in monetary terms, and it generally entails incomes versus the expenditure one probably will incur, maybe an organization, an individual, a family, a group of people, or anything of that nature.
So how do I go about creating a budget for myself? Do I just say, I want to buy a car next month and then I must put together my 2 cents? Or how do I go about creating a real budget for myself?
All right, when you create a budget, a lot is involved, and I can just try to go through it in a brief way.
Please.
There are 4 steps that you have to consider. The first step is to establish your goal. Remember, I said that it is a monetary expression of a plan.
Okay.
So before you actually execute a plan or you actually make a plan, you have to have a goal and an objective to say what is it exactly that I wish to achieve from this budget. So once you make your goals, your objectives, and know what exactly you want to do, you then move on to the next step, which is defining your incomes. Now you know that I wish to achieve this at a certain point in time, and then you have to identify how much money, how much income am I anticipating for me to be able to achieve this. And then when you finally lay down those and know how much income you're expecting, you then move on to the third step, which is actually counting your cost. Now you write down all your expenses and know this is what I anticipate. I'll have this kind of expense and so on. And from there, you can then go to the fourth step, which is actually making the actual budget. At this point, you're taking your incomes and you're taking your costs and balancing the two to make sure that whatever expense you want to incur would actually fall right into the incomes that you're expecting.
What is a goal? What is a financial goal? Is buying a pair of shoes a financial goal? Is wanting to become debt-free a financial goal? How do we go about determining whether something is goal-worthy for us to create a budget?
Okay, there's so many goals that that we may set in our lives, and depending on what exactly we want to achieve. For some people, a goal can be buying properties, houses, and so on. For someone else, it can be just getting by with life. So we ought to have a bigger picture of what we want to achieve in our lives, and I think it's all our goal to actually do something for our lives, have achieve more with our finances, and do so many things. And I like that you also touched the part that we want to be debt-free. In fact, Sister White admonishes us against having debt, and she actually says that we must shun debt as we would leprosy. And at that time, you remember that leprosy had no cure. So in other words, she's saying that as much as it is possible, we must not be in debt as far as that is concerned. However, while we're still talking about debt over there, when you're setting your budget and you're planning for your future, like I said, that a budget is actually a plan, and you're planning for your future, there are some items that we wouldn't necessarily call them debt. For example, I want to look at the acquisition of a house, a mortgage. While it's true that as much as possible we're trying to avoid getting ourselves into debt, buying a house or getting a mortgage for a house cannot necessarily be classified as debt. While you are paying monthly installments towards the house, that is actually an investment, and it actually works well for you and your family. So it's not debt, and it's very important that for some of these items where it's very important for us to have, then it's okay for us to get into such arrangements. And still speaking on that, I want to say that because of it's not possible for us to say I'll save up for a house, because I mean, how long would you have to save up? I mean, these hyperinflationary economies that we're in, so it's okay for us to get into those arrangements as long as we know it's an investment and not just for spending.
hyperinflationary economies. That's the accountant in you.
Yes.
What does
Yes.
that mean, and how does that then, or how does inflation or a hyperinflated economy affect our budget?
You know, it's really difficult because hyperinflationary economies really affect our budget, and you find that if we're a family and we plan a budget is a guide. Okay, we set up a budget is a guide, which must be adhered to at all costs. However, it is not the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be broken. Okay, so we're bringing in the aspect of a hyperinflationary economy where prices escalate every other day, prices go up. So you find yourself planning something at the beginning of the month.
Yes.
And then sometime during the month, you notice that what you actually planned for is actually not going according to plan. You see that we will not be able to get this. So it is also okay that during a financial period, be it a year for an organization, be it a month for a family or an individual, it's okay to revisit and review a budget and say, okay, because of the economy, because of maybe significant fluctuations in either income or expenditure, it is okay for us to actually revisit and revise and come up with something that will work best to help us fulfill our goals.
So outside of the extenuating circumstances and other pressures from the economy, how often should we be updating our budget? So we've set the budget, we've gone through the process, we've come to a certain figure, we've come to figure X, this is what we need to survive, or this is what we need to attain our goals. How often should I revisit that budget outside of hyperinflation and everything else going around?
Okay, each organization would probably have their own way of doing it, but financial year is usually 12 months. A financial period is usually 12 months for an organization. However, at home, as a family, as individuals, we would probably go with how regular we get our income. If you're earning on a monthly basis, then the budget can be revisited on a monthly basis. However, even when you're actually doing the budget, you'll notice that there are some fixed costs and there are some variable costs. And fixed costs are those that you know every month I'd incur those. For example, your utilities, your water, and things like that, your electricity. And then we have some variable costs which from month to month may change.
Yes.
So as a guide, when you're doing drafting a budget, you can have those fixed costs already lined up even before you actually revise it or revisit it monthly. You have those that will always appear. Then we have the variable costs, for example, planning for a family trip or we're planning to go on vacation somewhere. Those are variable costs that will come as and when they are needed. And
we've spoken about developing a budget, I guess, in the ordinary sense and in the ordinary course for both industry and for individuals and families. So that already predenotes that you've got a salary or some kind of income that's coming in on a regular basis. What about someone who doesn't have a regular income? How do they go about creating a budget or developing a budget for themselves?
Okay, so we have some of us who don't have a regular income. No one is exempt from having a budget, and no one is exempt from creating a budget and following it, because like I said, a budget is a plan of anticipated incomes and expenditures. So even before you actually get whatever you're going to get as your income, you already have an idea where you could be how your incomes could be for that particular period. So no one is exempt. You must create that budget. So create that budget basing on probably previous incomes, just an average or something like that. And then using that estimate, you can create and have your expenses and so on. And in fact, you know, it's even easier, sometimes it's even easier for you to save if you're using a budget based on incomes that probably haven't incurred, because sometimes you can actually lower your incomes, and because of that you fit in your expenses. And sometimes you can realize that I've actually under budgeted. So you can have something that you can actually save from there. And when you realize that that has happened, you have to save. However, on the flip side, if perchance you budget and you notice that I actually over budgeted, that's where you have to revisit your budget and correct that.
So if you've over budgeted, what would you then do with the surplus? What should you be doing with the surplus?
If you over budget with the surplus, the best is just for you to save.
Okay.
Yes.
Are there any particular types of savings that you would encourage people to look at, or is it 32-day account fine with any bank, or putting it under the mattress?
Saving, saving is actually biblical. There's a verse in Proverbs that actually says that God loves people who save. We must save whatever we get. I know, like I mentioned earlier, that our economies are just not friendly right now. Things are hard, things are tough. But we ought to get whatever we can, even if it's little from your budget. There always should be a budget line for your savings. Even if it's 10 Rand, 20 Rand, whatever little amount must always save for a rainy day. And it's even if the situation is hard, we must always make sure that we put aside something for that.
I think let's take a break right there. Thank you so much, Mqhele. We'll be back after this. Hello and welcome back to Money Matters. We're still discussing budgeting with Mqhele, who happens to be an accountant with the Southern Africa Indian Ocean Division of Seventh-day Adventists. Mqhele, just before the break, we were talking about over budgeting. Now let's talk about under budgeting. I think it's actually the other way around.
It is.
And I need you to help me if I can barely understand it. I'm sure the guests at home won't understand it.
All right.
So we were talking about under budgeting and now we want to talk about over budgeting.
Yes.
So where we don't have a surplus, in other words, we've spent too much. We have a deficit.
Yes.
Please.
All right. So when we over budget, it simply means our expenses are exceeding our incomes. This is our anticipated income, and for some reason, whatever reason, we decide to budget and our expenses become more. And because of that, this is when we have what we call a deficit, and it's not good for our budget.
So how is it that we get ourselves into that situation? Is it because we've budgeted revenues that aren't actually due to us, or we've over anticipated our revenues or our income?
Okay, so when we over budget, sometimes it's because we are anticipating to have incomes that may not actually come through. And sometimes it may be because if it's a family setup or an individual, it's because there's so many things that we want, there's so many that we need. And we tend to say, I'll try to get that, I'll get that, I'll get that. And yet we actually don't have enough income to cover those particular items.
So what do we then do in those situations? Are those the situations that then create debt, or that unexpected or unplanned for debt, and not the good debt like a mortgage?
Yeah. Okay, so in other words, in fact, when you create a proper budget, we should never over budget. We should never over budget. We shouldn't get to a point where our expenses actually exceed our incomes. The moment you create a budget and you realize, that means there's something wrong in the whole system, because a proper financial budget must never have incomes that are actually less than the expenditures, because our expenditures are drawn basing on what we are going to actually receive.
So are you basically saying that we should not be living beyond our means?
Exactly.
We should be living what we are earning, or in line with what our incomes.
Precisely. And Sister White again talks about it, that we should live within our means. In fact, in the 10 commandments, the last 2 commandments speak about that. Commandment number 9, that we should not covet. For the most part, women are guilty of this. Although men also do have that. Sometimes women tend to look at what the neighbor has. They got a new car, they have this and that, and sometimes you also want to look the part. You want to have that shoe, you want to have that, and so on. And this causes a challenge, especially in the family unit, where you have maybe a partner saying, no, we cannot do this because our incomes don't actually allow us to go that direction, and you have somebody else trying to push for the other direction. So sometimes, and just for the record, one of the main leading causes of divorce actually is in the financial part, because there's usually disharmony in this kind of things, where you find people having different interests and different goals and so on. So it's something that we really have to guard jealously, and know that when we come together and budget as a family, we try by all means to follow that budget that we create.
So we shouldn't be striving to keep up with the Joneses or the
Definitely
Rothschilds or
Definitely not.
or any of the wealthy families in the world.
Yes.
We should really be striving day
Yes.
by day. And I think you said Ellen G. White admonishes
Yes.
us to actually live within our means and to create this budget. And you've touched on a very interesting part. I guess we all understand financial stress, but I guess we understand it from an individual perspective when the debt collectors are coming after me as an individual. But I never thought it would extend so far as to a divorce and to
Yes.
divorce issues.
Yeah.
So maybe let's talk about how it is that we go about creating a palatable, is that the word, budget for a family. How is it that a family can have a budget that sustains them, the one that allows for them to live within their means, and also doesn't necessarily leave them deprived without having a little bit of fun?
Okay. I want to start with a verse, Proverbs 3 verses 9 to 10. I'll just paraphrase this, which says that everything that we have comes from God. And because of that, it means that when you set up a budget, whatever you want to spend on, if you put your mind to know that everything comes from God, then you will know how to spend those finances. You will know what to do with those finances. So that is the first thing that you always have to take note of. And many a time, us as Christians, some of us, really, people don't actually put tithe and offering in their budget, of which it's a must. And in fact, as you budget, it actually should be in the first line, because there you know that I need to return a faithful tithe and give God an offering. And then from there, the second stage for you to actually do a proper budget and come together and know how you're going to spend your incomes is to then count the cost. What is it that I'm going to do? What is it that I want to spend on? And as you're counting the cost, you have to prioritize. Have a priority list. What is it that I want to achieve? What is more important than the other? Yes, I can have all the luxuries thereafter, but first let me have all the priorities laid down. And then the third very important key aspect there is also that there should always be a saving. No matter how small, there should always be a saving. 100 rands or whatever amount you can agree with your family members, or even if you're an individual, there should always be a saving.
You've touched a little bit on priorities. One might say that for them, a priority would be debt, becoming debt-free. And you've emphasized that saving is also quite important. How do I weigh with my let's say I earn 10 rand and my debts are quite up there because I've been irresponsible, and let's say my debts and my living expenses are at about 7 rand, and now I've got this little bit of 3 rand to play around with. Should I prioritize overpaying my debt, or should I be prioritizing spending?
Priorities, basically what I can say with that is that we have to prioritize to be debt-free as much as possible. Be debt-free. You know, when there's actually a Bible verse that says that when you're a debtor, you're actually a slave. You become a slave to the person that you owe. You see, so we have to avoid that, and God doesn't like that. And when it comes to the aspect of saving, you know, when we talk about saving, we're not necessarily maybe saying that in the budget line we should have that line of money to be saved. There are many other ways that you can save. I want to give an example of something that can help you to cut your expenses that you save. For example, there are some simple tips that one can adopt, like planting a food garden. You know, there's many a time we spend so much in fruits, vegetables, and things like that, and yet at the back of your house you could actually plant a small food garden that would help you to cut down on costs that you spend. Another tip, a simple tip that anybody can really adopt is repair what's broken. You know, mend what's torn. When we have something that needs to be repaired, or something that's broken in the home, we throw it away, and the next thing that we do is we quickly rush to buy the next thing. And yet we are coming from most of us are coming from backgrounds where we used to repair things that were broken. We used to mend our, we sew our dresses, you stitch your dresses, but it's not what's happening right now. The society has taken a twist where if something goes wrong, you quickly replace. So there are those small tips, but that could actually help you. And another tip is to brown bag your lunch. Yeah, you see. So we spend so much. You can imagine the work environment. We spend so much instead of just packing these things and so on. One last tip that I just want to share with you, so that you can save, is that there's a famous statement that's actually used in financing that says that the best cost less, and which is very true, because I want to give an example of a particular type of food where you find the same type of food for, different types of food, but having probably the same nutrients, but the other costing less. Yeah, for example, let's have in our Adventist setup, meat. Meat is a good protein food, but then you find that it's quite pricey, and yet you can actually get a substitute which can possibly healthier, maybe like your beans, your various beans and all. It's actually cheaper and yet quite healthier. Another substitute maybe that we can actually say that this costs more and yet is actually maybe hazardous to our health. Maybe, for example, I want to give another example of our bread spreads, maybe let's say margarine. We have margarine which costs more than peanut butter, you know, and yet it's actually fatty and all those things. So in life we just have to look at, even in our kitchen, in our pantry, to check what is it that I can actually get which will cost less and yet it's actually good for my health. So that's another tip for saving that we can actually look at.
So what if the budget just isn't coming together? My budget is just not working.
Okay.
I've taken into account these tips, and I've taken into account not overcounting my revenue streams.
Okay.
But my budget just isn't working. What do I do?
Okay. A budget will always work. A budget will always work. A budget is a monetary expression of a plan, so it works. What may not work is your willingness to actually follow the budget.
Okay.
Yes. So it all goes down to the fact that how willing are you to actually put everything aside and actually follow that budget.
So picking meat over beans and home-cooked meal.
Exactly. we have the substitutes that can help us actually meet our budget.
Yes.
At the end of the day, you're gonna stay in a house, but where you're staying is all up to you. If you want to stay in Santon, if you want to, it's all up to you. But the thing is, a budget will work. Okay, so you're still gonna have your accommodation, you're still gonna have your meal, your decent meal, if you so wish, and so on. So it's just how much are you willing to let go in order for you to actually fall into plan with that particular budget.
So a budget requires discipline.
Very much so. Very much so.
The Bible says, train up a child in the way that they should go and they will not depart from it. How do we teach children about budgeting? Is it too early? Is there ever a time? Is it being too early to teach children about budgeting?
Okay. You'll notice I really like Sister White's writings, and she speaks also about that. She says that, I'm paraphrasing in Child Guidance, she says that instruct the children on economy so that they will know the right use of money. And from a very early age, when she writes about it, she says that children should be taught the right use of money, the value of money. How do we get money and how must we spend money? Children ought to be taught that everything we have, including the money that we have, all comes from God, and in a way does belong to God. So there's no child who's too small. What we need to do is to engage our children in the budget making process, so that they understand that this is how we are going to go about with our finances for that particular period. And you'll notice that if we engage the whole family when we're actually making a budget, when we don't have money for certain things, it's easier for a child to understand that our money is finished for that particular period. Unlike if you do it alone, mom and dad, they do it alone, and then the children come and this is what they expect, this is what they want. They probably won't understand when you actually say that we don't have money for that. But then if you involve them in the budget making process, it will be easier for them to come on board and understand how it works. In fact, Sister White goes on to say that we should actually entrust our children with small amounts of money and help them make their own budget, and actually help them follow that budget, you know, to actually say, okay, I gave you 50 Rand and this is what you say you're going to do for this month, and what have you done so far? So that will also help them to understand and know the value of money, and it will go a long way even in their future.
And be accountable.
Oh, yes.
So now we're advocating for kids to get allowances.
Exactly.
So Ellen G. White says the children must
Exactly.
get allowances,
Yes.
folks. Children must get allowances,
Yes.
so we can teach them. But it's also about responsibility.
Yeah.
If we're able to teach them responsibility from a young age, then we'll have responsible adults
Exactly.
who will know better to budget, to take
budget
care of their budgets.
and live within their means.
And live within their
Yes.
means.
Yes.
So what then else does the Bible tell us about budgeting? Because ultimately we want to understand all of this and we want to apply this practically, but obviously within the context of being Christians and within our Christian livelihoods.
Okay. You know, the Bible speaks so much about, the Bible speaks so much about anything and everything. I like Luke chapter 14, verses 28 to 29 and 30, where Jesus is talking to his disciples and he's saying, and again I'm paraphrasing, he's saying, who of you wanting to build a tower will not sit down first and count the cost and see if he can afford it. So in other words, he's saying that before you engage into anything, into any project, before you do anything, sit down and actually plan. This is the amount of money that I have, and this is what I want to do. Am I able to afford this? So Jesus also spoke on budgeting, and he expects everybody, no one is exempt, to sit down and budget. And again in Genesis we find the story of Joseph. We remember that Joseph was put to be in charge of the storehouses in Egypt. And the issue of budget again comes into play because you find that there had been the 7 years of famine.
Yes.
And now there had been the 7 years of plenty. And they stored up a lot for the 7 years of famine. So now during the 7 years of famine, it simply means that this is the time when all their supplies were being used. And Joseph was now in charge of those supplies, and he had to make sure that those supplies were used sparingly. And if you remember well, the supplies didn't only be used in Egypt. People came from other places and they used those supplies. So it's very important that we should guard jealously our supplies, our incomes, guard them jealously. Whatever we get, we should use sparingly to benefit even people from other places.
Mqhele, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the knowledge that you've given to us. Thank you for the tools and the tips as well. Folks at home, it's up to you. Your budget is completely in your hands, and what you do with it and how you manage your money is all in your hands. God has given us many tools to assist us in being able to do so, and now you need to apply those. Until next time, thank you very much and goodbye.